You can defeat thermal. What does the future look like? Do snipers go away completely? Even the role could change. It could be very much in control of a whole drone swarm. This Terminator scenario where the analog soldier now becomes an advantage. That was the first time I thought to myself, wow, the way that wars are being fought is changing. I spent 13 years in the Navy, most of that time as a Navy SEAL. My specialty was sniper, and after my tour in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002, I came back and trained snipers in advanced battlefield warfare, urban sniper, helicopter sniper, then went to teach at our 3-month sniper program, then eventually got promoted and ran it as a head instructor, or what we call course manager, for my last 3-year tour.
So I'm just going to get into Ukraine and what we're hearing from the battlefield there. So, you yourself were a SEAL sniper instructor, teaching men to essentially disappear and find targets. On the modern battlefield, with the amount of drones that are going on at any given time with Overwatch over huge portions of land, how does a soldier disappear on the modern battlefield?
Well, we used to train to conceal, um, to train snipers to conceal themselves in an environment that it was much less complicated than it is today. But still, we had um, thermal imaging, and so you can defeat thermal, but it's very difficult to defeat it long term, right? You're basically reflecting. You want to wear or mask your heat signature with material that will kind of conceal your heat, right? So an example of that would be a space blanket is an excellent thermal uh, a way to beat thermal, but the practicality of it is, you can't exactly run around dressed in a space blanket on the battlefield. And I think another reason we're seeing the shots get longer and longer because you're getting into these what I would call unpermissive environments, especially on a battlefield in Ukraine, where you have the massive amounts of drones on each side, tremendous amounts of technology, heat signature detection. So the snipers are now more, much more further away from the fight in some cases.
I think what's, I guess, maybe sparked the debate quite recently was the decorated Ukrainian sniper Vyacheslav Koyalavsky. He broke the record not too long ago, previously in the war, about 3,800 meters for the longest ever sniper shot. And he's just said that he's sort of re-augmenting his skills to become a drone operator. And he essentially said that sniping is dead. Um, do you think we are starting to see the end of the craft of sniping? And do you agree with what he said in that interview?
I agree that the role of sniping is changing. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion one way or another. It's more of this thought experiment, right? Because I've thought about it. What does the future look like? Do snipers go away completely? Clearly, today you need to integrate yourself into this drone environment. I mean, it's already, you know, back in the days of Vietnam, you had a traditional shooter spotter pair where one guy on the gun, one guy spotting, typically with a scope. That kind of changed even when I was in the military. We started realizing, because the SEALs are such a small unit and we don't have big numbers, we couldn't afford to send two snipers together. So we had to change the way we even train the snipers. As opposed to training a shooter spotter, we trained one sniper that could spot for himself. So quickly make corrections because we were deploying SEAL snipers alone, one sniper. So we had to train them to essentially operate by themselves. And that we were just starting to integrate a lot of technology. In Vietnam, you would hand sketch a target and bring back all this kind of analog intelligence. And when we were training them, we got rid of the old hand sketch and taught them how to take we had a whole photography class, digital photography class, how to compress data, send it back via satellite. Now that's getting 10x into this drone environment where drone operators are sending targets to forward deployed snipers and really integrating into that kind of battlefield picture. But when you think about the future, it's tough to say. There's a future potentially where this technology cancels each other out, right? And then all of a sudden analog is back in vogue, because an analog rifle system isn't necessarily going to like set off a bunch of sensors, so um it could play out all sorts of different scenarios. It's clear though that it's changing, right? It is changing. I guarantee this. When he made that long shot, he probably had drone support, right?
And I guess that was my next question, which was that is the analog soldier potentially going to be the MasterCard soon on the battlefield?
Yeah, that could totally happen, because even imagine a world where you have like an AI general, right? Who's very experienced in this specific. This AI general has been trained on the specific geographic location, the specific battlefield, and has control of all these different sensors. And it's almost like this Terminator scenario where the analog soldier now becomes an advantage, right? Because he doesn't have all this technology, and AI is countering each other out in many ways, and the analog soldier can essentially operate with much less signature than all this electronic warfare. So it's crazy, right? And the other thing I think we're seeing, in my experience, you had the U.S. should have never spent 20 years in Afghanistan. We accomplished our mission within 12 months. It was to destroy the the training camps and kill the terrorists, and we largely did that. Except it took us longer to get Osama bin Laden. The reason I mention that is because you had this old guard, at the top of the US Pentagon, right, making decisions. And so, of course, they're doing what they know how to do, and it's employ troops in a very conventional manner. So now you have, troops on the ground in Afghanistan, this big defense signature. Now, those guys are out. And now you're seeing, Trump's military, for example, Venezuela, right? A very, very much a lot of technology, integrated surveillance systems, intelligence, special operations, very surgical in nature, in and out, using technology to your advantage. And that's how the military should have been used back in 2001. But I think you had the older generals and admirals in this very old mindset, and that's shifted now clearly with the way the wars are being fought in Ukraine, Gaza, even Iran. It's kind of the mindset and the way future wars are being fought are changing. We're seeing it happen and play out in real time right now. So I think the days of conventional warfare, battleships, those are gone, and it's changing, right? So what does it morph into? I don't think snipers are going to be obsolete. I think the way that the sniper is deployed and even the role could change. It could be very much this in control of a whole drone swarm, could have all these different things, um, to different weapon systems to deploy, yet the sniper, maybe the job is to kind of sneak into enemy territory as a forward observer, which is a sniper role, since the very beginning of snipers. So it depends. It's a lot of variables, and we'll see how it plays out.
And I think talking about Afghanistan, it's quite interesting that recently, since Israel has been moving into Lebanon, we've seen Hezbollah release a lot of videos, propaganda videos of them using very cheap FPV drones. When you think back to your time fighting against insurgency groups such as the Taliban, can you point to any specific moment where you think that if I was there and FPV drones were a thing, we would have been in sort of big trouble?
Oh, absolutely. Um, I almost think more so in a rural environment like Afghanistan is, as opposed to more of this kind of dirty kind of street fighting door to door. Because in urban environments, you have it's much harder to fly drones, right? You have so many obstacles, power lines, different building heights, winds, shifting winds, lots of places to hide, take cover. Where in a rural environment, you have a cheap drone or a few cheap drones, you can cover massive amounts of area and really just increase your surveillance tech with a few $100s worth of drones.
I guess that's where snipers could still see themselves being a crucial part of the battlefield is in that urban environment. And we saw in Bakhmut, the battles earlier in the Ukraine war, that snipers were still incredibly effective. And do you think that might be where they're most utilized?
That's a good example of the role kind of expanding. It's always been a role of a sniper, even looking back to the movie everyone probably saw, American Sniper, which was based on Chris Kyle's book, who went through the Chris went through the program right when I got there, um, in on the West Coast, the sniper program. But they were being deployed to set up a sniper overwatch to allow troop movement through the battlefield, right? To provide this kind of sniper overwatch. That job is staying the same as you describe it, only the tools um, are getting much more advanced and more sophisticated. And for example, the drones. Now a sniper can essentially probably carries drones into those kind of positions, sets up camera systems, drones. So one sniper could control a huge amount of area and have this big situational awareness. And then as the troop can kind of like relay that to the troops. And a simple picture um, that I can paint is it's similar to a sniper in a helicopter doing overwatch on a shipboarding. That was a common mission for us when we were boarding those ships, smuggling oil out of Iraq and enforcing the UN sanctions. So helicopters up here with the sniper, it's sitting off, watching the ship a few miles away, passing information to the platoons that are on the boat teams, getting ready to kind of come up and board each side of the ship, um, and kind of give the platoon on the ground a play by play, what's happening, recommending movement positions to board, and then kind of swooping in at the last minute to cover the team as they're climbing up over the rails to take over the ship. It's similar in an urban environment, right? The sniper's there passing information, protecting units that are moving on the ground that maybe have blind spots, but clearly the technology and especially AI, like we're seeing now, I think for the first time in history, the Pentagon is using AI to essentially track people. They're hacking, you know, into traffic cameras in Tehran, with facial recognition, and they have basically can AI can kind of tag a person with a digital footprint and now track this person's every movement, and then that it easily integrates into the kill chain. And in the past, snipers will go and watch a target and develop a target package, and a big part of that package is what's the main target, right? What's the high value target? And we in analog develop a pattern of life. So we're like, okay, when does this guy pray in the morning? What time does he take a break? What time does he go to the bathroom? What does he do? Does he smoke 3 4 times a day? Does he take smoke breaks? So you build this whole target package. Well, now an AI can crunch all this data in seconds and develop a predictive algorithm. Hey, this guy's going to pop his head out at this afternoon in this 15-minute window, right? And that you're seeing this AI warfare play out in Iran. The Israelis have been very effective assassinating a lot of Iranian leadership this way. So it's getting crazier and crazier, right, with the technology. And again, maybe we go so much into the tech that the analog soldier becomes popular again, right? You have a Bowie knife and a sniper rifle.
Yeah. And I find this really interesting that When you look at this from where you're sort of sat now, out of the services, and you look in, do you think, God, I wish I had those things, or do you think I'm so thankful that my adversaries didn't have those things?
Yeah, I would say, you know, yeah, I probably have both feelings, right? Like, wow, what a complicated, changing environment it is today to operate as a sniper. And yeah, thank God I didn't have those kind of I wasn't dealing with those kind of threats, because it's not I would say historically the US has had a massive competitive advantage, the UK as well, in defense technology. But now you have a very cheap drone that someone can buy on Amazon, weaponized very easily, and that's where you're seeing the this also. It's worth noting this change in the defense industry, where companies like Anduril, who is led by Palmer Luckey, the kid that made the Oculus headset, he's saying, traditionally the military would come to you with a new sniper rifle or a new piece of sniper tech, and you'd say, yeah, this is what we want. They'd award a contract, and 5 years later it would come out. But even when I was still in the military, we'd get a laptop, this ruggedized Panasonic. I'm like, this thing is outdated. I can go to the Apple store and for half the price buy off the shelf technology and just adapt it to my needs very quickly and cheaply. And so the defense industry, the way they acquire and produce technology, is totally changing. This company Anduril, for example, they're like, you know what, this is the future. It's kind of like a Steve Jobs, right? This kid is like, you don't know what you need, I know what you need. I've already made three of them, and you can start buying them today. You don't have to like pay this expensive contract to manufacture. We've already made it. So, and that's why he's displacing these companies like Lockheed, Boeing. Their model is broken, 100% and SpaceX did the same thing with rockets, and outcompeted every vendor for NASA. And now you're seeing them try to keep up. And I think last year the JV was the SpaceX competitors. I want to say it was Boeing or Lockheed, but they ha- they put the astronauts into space, and they couldn't even bring them home on the system. And yeah, it's crazy.
And I wanted to touch on sort of the changing psychology of war with new technology, um, and how on the modern battlefield, an FPV drone pilot is seeing the person that they're killing right up close in goggles. And you've talked about in your books about the red circle and the target. Um, how does that kind of change the psychology of a soldier? Do you think?
I don't think it changes the psychology. I always my I've written about this extensively because I run a defense news site called sofrep.com. And I talk about a lot this psychological effects on soldiers, especially transitioning soldiers after they finish their service and transition to civilian life. I think it really comes down to, um, if the soldier can assign a purpose, going back to one of my favorite books by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. If you don't have a purpose behind what you're doing, and the effects of being in a wartime environment, seeing things, doing terrible things, seeing terrible things happen, um, if you can assign a purpose to it, like I feel, and I think most Ukrainians fighting Russians have a very strong sense of purpose. Like they believe in the mission, they believe what they're doing. And so, because they're fighting for their life, not only for their lives, for their homeland. And I feel like this psychological dynamic was very similar to World War II, allies versus the Axis. Clearly Nazi Germany was a threat and a bad thing for humanity. That war was brutal, right? Millions dead. um, Terrible things happened. Now the soldiers that came home from that had a very, I think, an easier time transitioning, because they could just put it all behind, because they could attach a sense of purpose to it. They felt like, okay, the mission is clear. I understand what's going on. I'm on the right side. Where things go sideways is a war like Vietnam. Later, my peer group that went to Afghanistan much later than I did, and I remember I had friends in 2010 that were like, "What are we doing in Afghanistan? We have no idea what we're doing here. My friends are dying. We're killing people, and we still don't know what the mission is." When you're in a situation like that, you're going to have psychological trauma because, in my opinion, you lack this kind of purpose to kind of um, latch onto, and it gives you a safe way to compartmentalize all this bad trauma. So that's a very long answer to your question, but I think it's a good question, and I feel like people that are war fighters that are put into environments where they don't understand the mission, essentially that's terrible leadership as well. And we saw that in Afghanistan and the US. I mean, we had 20 years, $1 trillion worth of equipment just left overnight, and people are scratching their heads like, what the hell was this all about? And I think I'm seeing it as somebody that employs veterans and runs a defense news site. The 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 amount of trauma is substantial because these war fighters are going, what the hell was this all for? Why was I doing these things? Why in 2012 in Afghanistan, what the hell was the mission? And it was crazy. I have friends who would go on a night raid, come back, and NCIS would be investigating them. Like, why did you shoot this guy? Like and it's got to the point of totally ridiculous way to fight a war.
I guess there was a little bit of it back then with the advent of larger drones.
Yeah, the Predator for sure.
Nowadays, people suggest that there's a bit of a video gameification of war because of the nature of the amount of computers in it. Do you think that changes how grounded a soldier is in their environment?
No, I don't think it changes anything. It's just, I mean, it's similar to a fighter pilot deploying you know, a missile, sending a missile into a bunker, killing
Yeah.
lots of people. You're far away from it, but it doesn't change what happens, right?
Do you think that the ideal soldier has changed with the new technologies that have come in? Do you think that model soldier is different from what it was when you first did Buds?
Yeah, I mean, again, the the nature of how we um, conduct warfare has changed. I saw it when I was on the USS Cole in 2000. We were doing shipboardings in the Northern Arabian Gulf, and the USS Cole, which was a destroyer, pulled into aid in Yemen, and two guys in a crappy little boat loaded with explosives blew a huge hole in the side of this warship, killed 17, I think, sailors, almost sank the ship, $1 billion warship, and a few $1,000s worth of equipment almost sank it. So we were sent down to do a sniper overwatch to make sure nobody we set up a perimeter around the boat and the harbor to make sure nobody else could sink the ship until they salvaged it. That was the first time I thought to myself, I was maybe 22 years old. I was like, wow, the way that wars are being fought is changing, right? And um, it's becoming more asymmetric. You don't have this conventional war. It's like, when we fought for independence from the British, right? The days of marching onto the battlefield in line and just shooting point blank at each other is over. We started seeing guerrilla warfare. Now you're seeing, you started to see the advent of asymmetric warfare in the early 2000s, and now we're at this next phase where I think not only has the technology changed, the mindset of the leadership has changed, because you had like I said, the old guard is out. They had a very traditional, conventional mindset. Now you're seeing, I think the military is being used how I think it should have been used back in the early 2000s in an operation with Venezuela or Iran, where we're very surgical. very much integrated technology, including artificial intelligence. But the ISR environment has changed and gotten way more sophisticated. But you're seeing the military being kind of deployed by the Americans in a way that I think is leveraging our strengths, right? With AI, um, satellites, all sorts of the information surveillance technologies, and so of course, the the modern warrior has to adapt, and so you're going to probably see a lot of changes within uh, the militaries of the world in how they train and think about, okay, what, do we want a radio man, or how do we want a guy that can operate the radio and fly the drone? So you're going to, these specialties that the militaries have in these different jobs, the same as we're seeing in the civilian marketplace, they're going to affect changes in the jobs and specialties of the military. They're going to have to adapt for sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you think that the US military now, specifically with the Maduro raid, showcased what should be happening and how major militaries should be changing. In the UK, as I'm sure you've heard, we have a few issues with our current troop numbers and the amount of funding that we're putting into our defense here. A lot of that comes from big numbers, loads of armored vehicles, all this kind of stuff. Do you still need that big stick behind all of your electronic warfare to stop your adversaries from even attempting to attack you? Or do you think funding more specialized units, such as ones that you're talking about, is what Britain should be doing to modernize its military?
Smaller numbers, more highly specialized, and investing in the future technologies and companies that are able to manufacture and adapt very quickly. And I keep coming back to Anduril because they were really the first in the U.S. defense supply chain to really change it up. And you seeing what they're doing now with I mean, go to Anduril's YouTube channel, the drones and the AI technology. They just built a stealth fighter jet that's fully autonomous. So even I'm a pilot as a hobbyist, and I love to fly, but my friends that are fighter pilots in the militaries, they tell me like, yeah, one day like we're out of a job, and it's a little sad to think about because I know Britain has an amazing aviation history going back to the Spitfire and beyond, but yeah, it's changing. We could get into an environment where, again, an AI wing commander is controlling a whole fighter wing of AI fighter jets. Yeah, so it's kind of crazy to think about.
In your heart, are you thinking, oh, the new technology, oh, it's taking away, that thing that I had, that we had? Or are you sort of saying, thank God that this has come along?
Yeah, I think personally, I've always been on the side of technology and advancement, and trying to use it to leverage to get any competitive advantage. And that, I think, maybe there's a few holdouts, that pine for the past, but generally, I would say most people in special operations are early adopters because they want every advantage they can get, and oftentimes it comes with technology.
And we've talked a lot about technology in this interview. And I just wondered what kind of advice you might have for just all of our readers, but also maybe parents, about how they can sort of keep their kids' head above the parapet and avoid being drowned by all this new tech.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So we were talking before about, what a pivot, right? I was writing about the SEAL teams, and I wrote a book called The Killing School about the sniper program. But when I actually left the military in 2006 because I had young children and I wanted to be around them as their father. And when you have a kid, they don't come with a user manual. I think what gave me an advantage as a father and a parent was that I had trained snipers in performance psychology, like positive performance psychology. So I had this toolkit to use, and I thought one day, well, if I can use this, I can teach snipers how to make decisions under pressure, how to mentally visualize and rehearse, how to push negative self-talk out of their heads. I could do the same with kids. And so I use this on all three of my children. and because I had kids very young, they were getting older. My friends, they were meeting my friends, and they kept making a positive impression. And everyone was like, "You need to write a book about parenting." So, I would say, you know, the big thing in Puddle Jumpers is, I give a lot of parents. It's kind of my parenting story. Having a very positive relationship with my ex-wife, who wrote the forward to the book for me. But it's our journey in parenting, the things that we did right, some mistakes that we made. But ultimately, we have three grown, amazing kids who are happy, independent, and living their life, not the life that anyone else wants to live or have for them. It's their choice. But the mental management stuff is huge. It's a huge kind of competitive advantage as a parent. But yeah, that's the reason I wrote the book, and I think it will help a lot of parents. And I think parents will be surprised at some of my philosophies in the book, as an ex SEAL sniper, because it's not so extreme as probably a lot of people are thinking.